Hey there, got a bit of a different video today. I'm actually on my main account instead of my Let's Play account. It's been a while since I did the last Let's Play episode. Probably do another one at some point. But between like polarized light grinding and everything, been kind of busy. Oh, my Let's Play account has logistics that just came in. Anyways, I have something fun. So, I raised KSVK mod, and then I threw her in our standard HDRF team with Beach Fairy. I was like, hey, this is pretty strong. What if I made a team that was just entirely built around KSVK mod's gimmick, which is that she benefits from, like, debuffs on enemies. And also, ACR, who also has basically the same gimmick, she also benefits from debuffs on enemies. Now, in KSVK mod's skill, it doesn't actually specify that this stacks when the enemies have multiple debuffs, but it does, according to the Angry Trap Midget Guide to Why Your Waifu Sucks. So yeah, it says right here, you get more damage if you have more debuffs from other sources. So yeah, if that's the case, then go wild, right? So ACR's skill helpfully lists all the different debuff types that you can have. Damage decrease, rate of fire decrease, accuracy decrease, evasion decrease, armor decrease, movement speed decrease, burning, and stun. Now, as far as I know, armor decrease is impossible to apply to enemies on purpose. I don't think there's any T-Doll that applies an armor decrease to enemies. However, all of the other ones listed here, the squad can apply them. So, let me pull up my notes. Let's see. So, damage decrease. ACR applies that. That's part of her active. Yeah, decreases the damage of ACR's target. Rate of fire decrease. That is applied by Beach Fairy. That is also applied by KSVK during her skill. Yeah, decreases enemy accuracy and rate of fire. KSVK. ADS also decreases enemies. What was it, rate of fire? Yeah. Then we have accuracy decrease, KSVK's skill when it activates. Evasion decrease is SPP1. She decreases enemy evasion. Armor decrease. Like I said, I don't think there's any way to apply that. Move speed, we got Beach Fairy and also ADS applying movement speed. Vector applies burning, of course. And then ADS actually applies stun when her erosion stacks get stacked all the way up. 2.4 second stun. So, all of these debuffs can technically be generated by this team. And that means that KSVK gets a lot of uptime on her passive, and potentially a bunch of stacks of her passive at once. And the same thing goes for ACR, who gets benefits from like enemies having debuffs on. Another interesting thing is KSVK will actually target the closest enemy with a debuff on. I don't think ACR specifically targets enemies with debuffs. Although, like, realistically, there's always going to be enemies with debuffs on. But, because ACR and ADS are assault rifles, they target the closest enemy. Because practically all the enemies are debuffed, KSVK is also mostly going to be targeting the closest enemy. So this, in terms of targeting, this squad acts much more like an HDRF team, or no, like an ARSMG team, in that it will always target the closest enemies, generally. But KSVK's passive does make her do damage to enemies behind her target. So anyways, I think that despite the squad being really weird, being built around a weird mechanic, I think that this is actually a very strong general purpose squad. In terms of testing, it is kind of hard to test that because there aren't very many enemy squads in that middle ground between trivial and like impossible to beat for like maxed out teams. This team is basically maxed out. Obviously the levels are not maxed out, but the skills are maxed out. The gear is maxed out. The fairy is maxed out. So this is basically like a max power level team. And like there aren't very many enemies that can realistically challenge a team that is this raised. Most of the like story content is balanced to be beatable without having 5-star fairies. So there aren't too many enemies that you can actually face that are a challenge to 5-star fairy teams. But yeah, if you have any ideas for particular places where I can find squads that would be a good challenge, I'd be interested to know. Because like basically what I'm looking for is something like a big Manticore death stack that has like 100k combat effectiveness or something. Because you can actually beat those teams with a 5-star fairy. Like you could just straight up fight those gigantic Manticore death stacks. Because they're just like normal enemies with amped up stats. Whereas when you get like Hydra death stacks or something, then it's a lot different because like if the Hydras touch you, you're dead. And then same thing with like red beams. A lot of the death stacks that they use nowadays are just basically impossible to beat. They're not like normal enemies with amped up stats. I know that in like the Valhalla collab, there were some of those Manticore death stacks, but obviously I can't play that anymore because it's not active. Maybe in some of the previous campaign levels, there are some of those. Or like alternatively, if there were just like really beefed up like Vespids, what are they called? Like the regular assault rifle enemies. Or dragoons, or like whatever. Just like regular ass enemies with really amped up stats. That's what I want, ideally. Now, the next best thing is there's actually like the target practice mode. So I'm gonna do a test. I have done this test, but I have not done a comparison between that and a regular HGRF team. So here we have Here we have a regular ass HGRF team, Grape and R93. R93, quite good. We also have Beach Fairy in here. So this is basically what I would use for like a standard HGRF team. Not necessarily R93, but like Grape is kind of a must pick for a strong HGRF team. Now, notably, I don't think this team really has any AoE. So that is a downside of this team. You can throw in an AoE rifle for your other slot, but usually you wouldn't. So this is like, yeah, we'll compare how this standard HGRF team does versus the debuff team. So debuff team first. This is the Wandering Stragglers enemies. I think this one will be trivial for both teams. These are not actually that tough of enemies. Those guys are annoying because of their range, but not really a significant threat. So let's do this one again, but switch the team to Formation 2. Gotta have Mark 23 as the leader, of course. Yeah, theoretically, I could do a better Combat Fairy skill for the second team because it doesn't need the Beach Fairy debuff, but Beach Fairy is strong in general. Yeah, for the second team, I could do actually a 5-star parachute for better stat stick, because I have a 5-star parachute. Alternatively, I could do like taunt or something, but Beach Fairy is good. And I have 2 5-star Beach Fairies, so like the first team actually does kind of need the Beach Fairy because Beach Fairy applies some of those debuffs. So it would be significantly worse with a different fairy. Alright, let's do rates. I have the feeling that the standard HGRF squad might have issues with this because it doesn't have AoE. And this is obviously an enemy composition that wants AoE. But I think that the standard HGRF might have better single target DPS, so let's see. Alright, let's do it. Okay, still took it out with basically no damage taken. Lost a little bit of HP, but not significantly. Is that like percentage of a link? Wait, no. That's the percentage of damage taken by the team? It's divided amongst them? What? That's such a weird way to do that metric. I thought that was like the percentage of the T-Doll's HP that they lost, but no. That's like the percentage of the HP lost, the total HP lost by the team. So like if you add these two together, it makes 100%. Okay. I didn't realize that until just now. Okay, but yeah, still, regular standard HGRF did just fine against that. Let's do the next one. This one is probably the closest to that, like, big brute force enemy comp that I want, but, like, obviously, because it's the tank DPS style, standard HGRF just tears through it. They don't even have to worry about the DPS things. Now, versus this one, the debuff team, because it targets the front first, has a little bit more difficulty with this, but still does a lot of damage to them. Definitely took more damage from these guys than the standard HGRF team. Alright. Switch to the next one. These actually have 100% shields. I've never tried these without an HOC. Let's try it. If they have 100% shields, then it's just not gonna work. No, they don't even have 100% shields. Yeah, so like whatever, they're just dead. Yeah. Yeah, so SPP1 lost 12 HP. 100%. That was 100% of the damage taken by the team. That's how the percentage works. Yeah, obviously in single target, Grape is just OP. Standard HGRF is pretty hard to beat in single target, especially when you have Grape. Alright, next one. I think this one is pretty trivial. Just like, wow, there's the Mime Layer dudes. Spooky. Yeah, whatever. Like, Alright, let's try with this team. SPP1 definitely took a lot more damage again. She is not very tanky. So, she does tend to take more damage. This is more of a, like, brawler type team. Whereas the standard HDRF team is more of a glass cannon, just like kill things as fast as possible. Right. Switch the enemy comp to this one. This is very single target focused, so I think this team does struggle a bit against this, just because those big armored targets take a while to get through. But it does beat it. So far, both teams have beaten everything. This is what I'm talking about, with like, even in these test scenarios, you don't get fights that are actually challenging to beat with max level teams. Like, I feel like the whole point of a test scenario is that it ought to be a challenge, and that's the same thing with the EX levels. Like, they ought to be a challenge where you actually need to, like, build teams to counter the enemies, but they're not. You should just take any max level team that's a decent team comp, and it'll just kill almost anything, even in the EX levels. Which is just kind of crappy game balance. And that's all because of fairies. Like, I think that releasing fairies was a mistake. Because, like, well, with the way that fairies work, 5-star fairies are just time gated. So they can't assume that like, experienced players are going to have 5-star fairies unless they've been playing for a long time. And that's why they don't build around 5-star fairies, they build around, like, 2-star fairies or whatever. So the content isn't actually balanced for people who have max power teams. It's just too easy. Okay, I did this with both, right? I didn't even really pay attention to that one. I was too busy ranting. But I beat it, right? Okay, this one is where you start to run into issues. I think the standard HDRF might be better against this, but this squad cannot beat the level 5 Hydras. And that's partially because it includes units that don't counter armor directly, so you're effectively down to 1 DPS unit. You don't ADS is doing almost nothing. And yeah, Hydras touch you, you're dead. That's not. They're not really like a brute force unit. They're just like they just don't let them touch you. That's how you fight them. You don't fight them with brute force. You fight them with raw DPS. Because you can't tank them. I bet this squad is actually going to beat it, though. Because you've got Grape, you've got a bunch more DPS. Yeah. Choose it right up. Okay. But if I step down the difficulty to level 4, then the debuff team can beat it. Yeah, so like basically what I was talking about with the game balance with fairies being busted is like that squad setup that I have for squad 2. Basically, I used that entirely in the last major event. I forgot which one was that. Shattered Connection, I think. So I used like that squad setup. I've had like a couple of squads that were basically the same thing. HDRF squads with Grape. And all but like 2 fights in the entire event I could do with the same squad setup. Because they just beat everything. There's nothing that's actually a challenge to them. Until you get into super gimmicky ones like laser tanks or Judge or something. Okay, these guys are also an issue for my debuff team. Let me try using auto skill judiciously to hit them when they're jumping. Okay, get up. Yeah, but these are another example of like really gimmicky enemies. I would prefer to test this squad against enemies that aren't so gimmicky. Oh, I forgot to turn off auto skill while they were shielded. I think I'm gonna lose in that case. Maybe? Not doing that bad right now. Oh yeah, all my tanks are dead. So yeah, probably just gonna lose. Yeah, I guess if I were Mika team right now, what I would do is change the way that leveling fairies works. Like, well, they kind of have. They introduced prototype fairies, which helps. But I would make a way to have players actually farm fairy enhancement fodder, instead of it just being time gated by, like, your logistics drops. Like, have a map where you can play the map to farm fairy enhancement fodder. And that way, players can actually get 5-star fairies within a more reasonable amount of time. And that way, they can actually make content that is balanced around 5-star fairies. Because, and like, if they're making EX levels as is, I think the EX levels should be balanced around 5-star fairies. Because it's really frustrating as like an endgame player to be playing a strategy game where there's no strategy in like team composition, because you just make one team comp and it beats everything. It's too easy. So yeah, let's do the same thing. So yeah, I think I didn't even pay attention to that very closely, but I'm pretty sure that this team beat it. This team just beats everything. Especially if I do auto skill off until they jump. Yeah, it just murders them. So, yeah, if I then switch to the debuff team again, I think that there are situations in which that debuff team might be better than a standard HDRF team, but you would have to have, like, really strong brute force enemies, and that's just not the case currently. Like, you don't really run into those enemies very often. And even then, like, beating a standard HDRF team with a Grape is a very high bar. Because Grape is just that good. this is a weird team comp. But I would say that this team comp does work surprisingly well in general for how weird it is. It's definitely unconventional. You might actually get better results putting KSVK in a standard HDRF team as well, as opposed to building a weird team around her. Like, for instance, if I do Echelon 2, which still has Beach Fairy, and then I just sub in KSVK mod here. So we have KSVK mod plus Grape. Yeah, this does way better than the debuff team. It's just so much more raw DPS. And in this case, there are armored enemies too, which really makes it unfair to the debuff team. Ideally, you would have really strong unarmored enemies to test the debuff team because, like most of the units don't have AP, including one of the main DPS units in that team. Alright, let's do this one again. Yeah, and in this team, KSVK is really competing with Grape for damage output, which is impressive. Like, KSVK mod is definitely a good unit. And I feel like using KSVK mod with Beach Fairy alone is a very strong combination. Adding in the other debuffers could be especially good in certain circumstances, but you have to find like a really strong enemy squad that does not have a lot of armor to properly test that team. And that's a big ask. Yeah, if you have any ideas for good squads to test that team against, I'm all ears. I need to switch over my logistics, I think. Which one was that just finished? Oh, that was 7-1. Okay, I want to keep 7-1. You may have noticed that I'm kind of low on rations, which is why I'm switching over my logistics now. 7-1 I want, though. Yeah, I also have all the HOCs maxed out, except for the ones that are not available. Like, there's one that's not available in analysis yet. The one from the recent theaters, which I have not participated in because I hate theater. So I don't think I even have that one. I literally don't even have it, right? Because I don't know. I don't think I've done the recent theaters at all. So there's that. But yeah, this is definitely an interesting and fun team comp. Whether it's actually viable against any enemies that we actually have is another question. I mean, then again, against most of the enemies that you run into, it still trivializes them. It's only like very hard enemies where it would have any chance of being challenged by them. And yeah, for it to actually be better than a standard HGRF team. It would have to be a very particular type of enemy. For like general use, you're still better off with this probably. Or this. You only get one M4 mod, but ARSMG, like this team just kind of punches through everything. It doesn't even matter if there's armor. Like they just do so much raw DPS. Especially if I were to like throw a 5-star para on here. That raw DPS is just gonna tear through basically everything. Like it doesn't even matter that they don't have AP. Actually, let's try that. Just for the lulz. Let's try that team against these drills. Particularly the ones that I was having issues with the ARSMG team before. Just do this with Parachute Fairy. They actually aren't really punching through. These enemies have really high armor. What is the armor? Does it tell you the stats? I don't think you run into enemies with that level of armor anywhere in actual combat. Okay, well I can look at them. Tell me what the stats are. You could probably look that up. Yeah, I'm guessing it'll be the same with this. It just has an absurd amount of armor. So that's why I was having issues with the debuff team. In practice, enemies that you actually run into in actual battles don't have that much armor. The amount of armor they have doesn't actually mitigate assault rifle damage that much. I think in Polarized Light EX there are some enemies with an armor level approaching this where it actually makes assault rifles less viable. I don't think there's any with armor this tough though. I don't think there are any that actually took this long to kill with assault rifles. So yeah, they're definitely struggling in this situation. But in most situations, assault rifle ARSMG is just as good. Like, you can beat basically any content that they're putting out with, like, 5-star Fairy ARSMG or 5-star Fairy HGRF. Like, whatever. Just, like, throw a general purpose squad at it, and it just beats almost everything. Which, yeah, I realized this has turned into a balanced wine video. But hey, I also showed off an interesting team comp. So yeah. Also, I didn't, at the beginning, show the formation, but this is the formation. Obviously, you saw it in the combat. Yeah, this way, KSVK buffs SPP1. You can also do the opposite, and the only thing you lose is KSVK's buff on SPP1. This way, you do have a slightly better formation in terms of tanking, but I haven't had that many issues with tanking, so I do the B formation to get the extra cooldown reduction. I've also tried a variant of this where SPP1 is replaced with a second SMG for better tanking, because SPP1 is rather squish. Yeah, but certainly versus any non-armored enemies, or enemies without, like, ludicrously high armor, this team is good, I would say. Anyways, I think that's it for this video. I ranted long enough. I'll catch you guys in the next one, which will probably be an actual Let's Play episode. We'll see. Bye!